It was a heated back and forth yesterday on Capitol Hill. The CEOs of Facebook, Amazon, Alphabet, and Apple testified virtually, facing tough questions from the House Judiciary Antitrust Subcommittee about competition, privacy, China, and anti-conservative bias. Watch.
Can you assure Americans today you won't tailor your features to help Joe Biden in the upcoming election?
We won't do any work, to politically tilt anything one way or the other. It's against our core values.
But you did it in 2016. In spite of the fact you did it in 2016, President Trump won. I just want to make sure you're not going to do it again in 2020. I'll just cut to the chase. Big tech's out to get conservatives. That's not a suspicion. That's not a hunch. That's a fact. The power these companies have to impact what happens during an election, what American citizens get to see prior to their voting is pretty darn important.
It is possible that at Facebook, your employees do have the power to disadvantage conservative viewpoints.
Of course, when you have tens of thousands of employees, people make mistakes. People have some of their own goals some of the time.
Joining me right now is Florida Congressman, House Armed Services and Judiciary Committee member, as well as House Antitrust Subcommittee member Matt Gaetz. Congressman, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thank you so much for being here. Give me, overall, what struck you most about yesterday's hearing?
The bipartisanship. Republicans and Democrats are working together to take on some of these America-last technology companies. Whether it's Amazon stealing products, Facebook spying on their users, or Google refusing to work with the U.S. military and then jumping overseas to advantage the targeting capabilities of Chinese fighter jets. I think it's right for us to ask not what America can do for our technology companies, but perhaps what our technology companies can do for America. And I'm excited about the fact that Republicans and Democrats are actually working together on this issue because it will define the future how users will interface with our major technology platforms.
Yeah, I guess everybody agrees that they are more powerful today than they ever have been. When the Telecommunications Act of 1996 first went into law, they gave these companies protections, technology companies protections, that they are not going to get sued, that they are quote-unquote bulletin boards or platforms. Do you believe that is no longer true? And what will Congress do about it? Will we see these protections be taken away?
And Maria, you're specifically talking about liability protections that digital platforms enjoy under the auspices that they are neutral, that they do not advantage one side or the other, and thus they shouldn't get sued. Those particular protections have allowed these companies to grow very large, but we haven't always seen the neutrality. What we learned from the hearing yesterday is that particularly with Google and Facebook, the people that work at those companies have the ability to go and manipulate what you see and what you think because they want to control how you act. The fact that they made those concessions means that the Department of Justice needs to be a lot more aggressive about mandating the transparency that would append to these liability protections. So we don't need more government. Perhaps we need fewer of the special government accommodations that benefit these large platforms that then are unfair to the viewpoints that aren't reflected in the woke-topia of Silicon Valley.
All right, so what are the odds that that protection goes away then?
I think that the protection will go away if the antitrust division at the Department of Justice engages in aggressive litigation to showcase the lack of neutrality on those platforms. I do not believe that Congress will change the law because far too much of Congress is bought off by big tech, whether it's through PAC donations or whether, frankly, a lot of big tech goes and hires up everybody's staff to go work for them, and it's quite an incestuous process. So it won't be a consequence of any brave action from Congress. We largely lack that bravery. But if we have just a little bit of gumption over at the DOJ, I think we can really force the transparency that will animate the changes that will allow us to be able to use online platforms in a way that allows users to seek the information they want rather than being socially controlled by Silicon Valley big tech overlords.
Wow, and some people do expect antitrust lawsuits coming, like against Google and Facebook. Dagan, weigh in here.
Well, indeed, Maria, I just want to point out that the antitrust probe into Google is the most advanced of the lot. According to reporting in the Journal, the Justice Department expected to file a suit this summer. And then you also have the Justice Department, the FTC, and state attorneys general looking into various parts of these businesses. But, Congressman, it was the lack of action by people in Washington over the years that allowed these companies to get as large as they did. In 2006, when there was a Republican in the White House, Google was allowed to buy YouTube, and that is part of its power base. In 2012, it was Facebook was allowed to buy Instagram. So maybe do you bust these companies up at this point, or do you certainly take a more aggressive posture in limiting their growth through acquisition? In many cases, they buy up these companies and just shut them down.
I don't know that busting up big tech is the sole remedy. I think if you force them to demonstrate why they believe that they should avail themselves to these liability protections, they will actually change their behavior. But let me just be honest with you about how things have worked at the Department of Justice with Republicans and Democrats in the past. A lot of the people that are at DOJ end up going to work for big tech. And so what they want to do is create just enough virus in terms of antitrust litigation so that they can then leave the Department of Justice, go work for big tech, and sell the antidote. It's a pretty corrupt process that existed with Republicans and Democrats in the past, and I think Attorney General Barr and President Trump understand the importance of this. They're serious, and this round of antitrust litigation will be far more effective.
Yeah, I agree with you about Bill Barr. Real quick, Congressman, let me ask you about China. You brought up China during yesterday's hearing, asking Google CEO Sundar Pichai about his dealings with the Chinese military. You said it a minute ago. They walked away from Project Maven because their employees were all up in arms that they didn't want Google to work with the U.S. government, and yet they have an AI lab right there in Beijing. And we all know that when you're in Beijing, that means you're working for the Chinese military in terms of technology. Your thoughts on the China threat?
Google has an AI center in China. They have a multi-million-dollar collaboration through the Tsinghua University, where the Chinese military is plowing cash. And some of the top talent from Google has been cited in Chinese state media talking about China rattling the world with their power. And so I think that Google needs to be a lot more aggressive about ensuring that they're not advancing the interests of other countries at the expense of ours. But the one good thing, Maria, is that Sundar Pichai took the pledge that he will not adopt the anti-police bigoted policies that his employees have asked for. They got us out of the DOD deal, but they won't allow us to deprive police of basic digital services.
Yeah, I think this is a really important point that you brought up, Congressman. I hope you stay on it because Google and that AI center in Beijing seems to be quite dangerous. Congressman, it's good to see you this morning. We'll keep watching. Thank you, sir.
Good morning.
Matt Gaetz joining us there. Be sure to check out the Congressman's new book, Firebrand, Dispatches from the Front Lines of the MAGA Revolution by Matt Gaetz. Great read. Check it out. We'll be right back.